August 2017, a horrific case of child neglect and abuse came to light in Iowa that shocked the conscience of the community. 4-month-old Sterling Cohn was found dead in his baby swing, having been left alone and uncared for by his parents for up to 2 weeks. The details that emerged painted a disturbing picture of extreme neglect that led to the infant's agonizing death. On August 30, 2017, Zachary Cohn called 911 to report that he had found his son Sterling unresponsive in his baby swing. When first responders arrived at the apartment in Alta Vista, Iowa, they discovered a scene of unimaginable horror. The 4-month-old infant was found dead in a baby swing, his eyes open and his tiny body already in a state of decomposition. The room where Sterling was found was extremely hot and had a strong odor of urine and feces. Most disturbingly, Sterling's diaper was filled with maggots, indicating he had been left in the same diaper for an extended period. The 911 call made by Zachary Cohn initially raised suspicions among investigators. Cohn's demeanor was described as unusually calm and detached for a parent who had just discovered their infant child dead. He suggested to the dispatcher that Sterling may have died from SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. This explanation immediately struck investigators as implausible, given the state in which Sterling was found. As the investigation unfolded, a clearer picture emerged of the circumstances surrounding Sterling's short life and tragic death. Sterling's parents, 20-year-old Cheyenne Harris and 28-year-old Zachary Cohn, were a troubled couple with a history of substance abuse issues. They also had a 2-year-old daughter named Nala, who, in contrast to Sterling, appeared to be well cared for. The autopsy results were devastating. The medical examiner determined that Sterling had died from a combination of malnutrition, dehydration, and infection caused by diaper rash. Based on the development of maggots found on Sterling's body, experts estimated he had been left unattended in the swing for 9 to 14 days before his death. The cause of death was ruled as homicide by denial of critical care. Investigators soon uncovered more details about the dysfunctional household. Both Harris and Cohn were methamphetamine users, with Harris admitting to using the drug after Sterling's birth. Their drug use clearly impaired their ability to care for an infant. Friends reported that the couple often seemed unaware they even had a baby, as Sterling was rarely seen or mentioned. The circumstances of Sterling's birth were also concerning. Harris had given birth to Sterling unexpectedly in the bathtub during a party, not even realizing she was in labor. This lack of prenatal care and preparation set the stage for Sterling's neglect from the very beginning of his life. When interviewed by police, both Harris and Cohn gave conflicting and implausible accounts of Sterling's care in the days leading up to his death. Their stories did not align with the physical evidence found at the scene. It became clear that neither parent had provided even the most basic care for Sterling in his final days and weeks of life. Both parents were arrested and charged with first-degree murder and child endangerment causing death. Their trials, held separately, exposed the full horror of Sterling's short life and revealed the extent of his parents' neglect. At Zachary Cohn's trial, prosecutors painted a picture of a father who had utterly failed in his duty to protect his vulnerable infant son. They argued that Cohn's actions directly led to Sterling's death through extreme neglect. The prosecution emphasized that this was not a case of accidental death or SIDS, as Cohn had initially claimed, but a deliberate failure to provide even the most basic care. Cohn's defense attempted to shift blame entirely onto Cheyenne Harris, arguing that he had trusted her to care for the baby while he worked. He claimed to be unaware of Sterling's dire condition. However, given that he lived in the same small apartment, this explanation strained credulity. The jury was unconvinced by Cohn's attempts to absolve himself of responsibility. After deliberating, the jury found Zachary Cohn guilty on all counts. He was convicted of first-degree murder and child endangerment causing death. The verdict reflected the jury's belief that Cohn bore responsibility for the death of his son through his deliberate inaction and neglect. Cheyenne Harris's trial followed, with her defense taking a different approach. Her attorneys argued that Harris was suffering from severe postpartum depression and the effects of drug addiction. which impaired her ability to care for Sterling. They portrayed her as a victim of mental illness and substance abuse rather than a deliberately malicious actor. The defense highlighted the fact that Harris's older child, Nala, appeared well cared for, arguing that this showed Harris was capable of being a good mother when not in the grips of depression and addiction. They attempted to present Sterling's death as a tragic result of Harris's mental health struggles rather than intentional murder. Prosecutors, however, argued that Harris had failed in her fundamental duty as a parent to provide basic care for her infant son. They emphasized that resources and support were available if she had sought help, but instead she had chosen to neglect Sterling to the point of death while continuing to care for her older child. Despite the defense's attempts to portray Harris as a victim of mental illness, the jury ultimately found her guilty of first-degree murder and child endangerment causing death. The verdict reflected the jury's belief that her actions, regardless of her mental state, constituted murder through extreme neglect. Both Zachary Cohn and Cheyenne Harris were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for their roles in Sterling's death. Their appeals have thus far been unsuccessful, with courts upholding the convictions. The case of Sterling Cohn's death shocked the community and raised difficult questions about parental responsibility, mental health, drug addiction, and child welfare. Many were left wondering how such extreme neglect could go unnoticed, and how systems designed to protect vulnerable children had failed in this case. The tragedy highlighted the devastating impact of methamphetamine addiction on families and children. Both Harris and Cohn's drug use clearly impaired their ability to care for an infant, yet they continued to use meth even after Sterling's birth. The case underscored the need for greater resources and interventions for parents struggling with substance abuse. Mental health also played a significant role in the case, particularly for Cheyenne Harris. Her defense team argued that she suffered from severe postpartum depression, which, combined with drug addiction, led to Sterling's neglect, while the jury ultimately rejected this as a complete defense to murder charges. The case highlighted the devastating impact untreated mental illness can have on new mothers and their children. The contrast between the treatment of Sterling and his older sister Nala raised troubling questions. How could parents adequately care for one child while so severely neglecting another? This disparity hinted at the complex family dynamics at play and the particular vulnerability of infants who are entirely dependent on their caregivers. The case also exposed potential gaps in social services and child welfare systems. How had Sterling's severe neglect gone unnoticed by family, friends, or authorities? Could earlier intervention have saved his life? These questions led to calls for improved monitoring and support for at-risk families with infants. The tragedy of Sterling Cohn's death serves as a stark reminder of society's responsibility to protect its most vulnerable members. It highlights the critical importance of support systems for new parents, mental health resources, addiction treatment, and vigilant child welfare services. While nothing can undo the suffering Sterling endured in his short life, the case has sparked important conversations about how to better protect children from neglect and abuse. As the community continues to grapple with the aftermath of this heartbreaking case, there is hope that lessons learned may help prevent similar tragedies in the future. Sterling's story, though tragic, may serve as a catalyst for improved support systems and interventions to protect vulnerable infants and children from neglect and abuse.